Hello. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. This is webinar 5 in a series of 12 webinars, weekly webinars, where we're looking at the role and function of empathy in civic society as we live and cope and go beyond COVID-19. And over the last number of weeks, we have been looking at COVID in different contexts in terms of its impact on us as people. And last week we had a very enthralling session looking at how, for people living with both intellectual and physical disability, the pandemic has impacted on them. This week, our focus moves to sport. And ironically, we're at a time around the world where there is no sport visible that we can go to. But in many countries, we're looking back over great sporting occasions and sporting heroes. And today we're joined by some of those in different guises. And rather than go through long introductions, because we only have an hour, but we have colleagues from Barcelona Football Club, GA headquarters, legends of football, both men and women, and a boxing champion and pioneer of empathy in sport. I'm particularly delighted to have my colleague Mark Brennan, who's a fellow UNESCO chair at Penn State University, and who, with myself, is co-convener as UNESCO chairs of this global virtual conversation around empathy. And this is a collaboration between NUI Galway, where I work, and Penn State University, and is housed within the Institute for Life Course and Society, which I am director. So I will introduce each of the speakers as I come to them, and this is a non-academic event. If it becomes academic, it has failed and it is boring. It is a conversation between people. We're all trying to cope with something here and get 1 hour respite. If nothing else, you can rate our haircuts. I don't have any hair, so I can say that. If that's the least you get out of it, we hope the most you will get out of it in a serious way is a bit of engagement around how empathy actually is impacting and affecting us in very different ways. So we will have questions and answers at the end. So to kick off, I'm going to go to my good friend and close colleague, Professor Mark Brennan, fellow UNESCO chair at Penn State University. So Mark, I was hoping you might start by giving us a little bit of contextualization about the role of sport, its connection to civic engagement, community development and belonging. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, that'd be great, Pat. Thanks. And thanks all of the rest of our panel here. As we were framing this out, this kind of goes back to some work we've always kind of focused on sport as a component to positive youth development and society development. But this goes back to something we did a couple of years ago. So in 2014, Pat and Alan Smith, who's our other UNESCO chair colleague and mentor to both of us from the University of Ulster, and we did a major symposium on youth civic engagement and leadership through sport at Croke Park. And it was a major UNESCO event. It coincided with the Croke Park Classics, which brings American football to Ireland and builds some really cool connections there. And that led to an actual declaration that we had put together and is now being used that focuses on the importance of sport for positive global development, not just youth, not just communities, but beyond that. And the GA were really key partners in that, and it really kind of set the stage for a lot of this. And I think what the event did, and I think what we get at sometimes too, is that the importance of sport transcends everything. It goes way beyond the game. And if it's done right, sports and recreation, they're conduits to positive youth development. They're conduits to positive social behavior, with things like empathy, things like connectedness. And, sport provides these social networks, these linkages of people that may be your same age, they may be older than you, they may be younger, but helps us all connect a little better kind of locally. And I think the GAA in particular is a great example, but also the Barcelona Foundation has been a classic example of this. But how, through sport, you connect this to local life, to decision-making, and to supporting local people in their home places. And I think there's some really great examples there of how sport can do that. And the other thing too, I think the really key part of sport is it holds a really strong community building piece. You know, think of all the great contacts and connections, and even all the work we got done that takes place. You know, maybe in the car park before a match or other things. So I think it's really key there. And then I guess the last thing I would mention is, and this comes with our work with Alan Smith. You know, sport can be a mechanism for us to achieve peace. It's a great thing if we can get to the point where we're only fighting about which, you know, how our team did compared to yours, and that connects us. It gives us a common sense of identity, and it's a really great thing. So, you know, I'll just mention a couple other things, and I know the other panelists, I'm sure, will hit on these. But you know, Pat and I have done a lot of research around youth engagement, civic engagement, and you know, there's a whole bunch of things that come out of this that people often don't think about with sport. So it's, you know, there's obviously physical and mental development, but we learn how to interact with each other. We learn how to work on teams together. It gives us some discipline, some resilience, all these kind of things. And if it's done right and we set things up in different ways, it allows us to facilitate the growth of our communities by looking after older people, engaging with older people, engaging with younger people, all these sort of things. So I'll just leave it at that, and we can come back to different things. But I think it's a really, really important aspect of this, and especially in the context of all the things we're dealing with now with this pandemic. You know, sport's going to be one of the major pieces of this. And I think the way that we've shown empathy, and you've shown empathy through all of your work, is just a guiding light in this whole process. So I'll hand it over to you, Pat, and then we can talk more later on.
Many thanks, Mark, for opening up the conversation. We're going to move to our first speaker now, who is Yolanda Anton. Yolanda is Partnership Coordinator with the Foundation at Barcelona Football Club in Catalonia in Spain. I had the pleasure of starting to work with Yolanda about 5-6 years ago within my work in UNESCO, and I've been absolutely amazed and incredibly impressed by the philosophy of Barcelona Football Club. I can't let the occasion go by without mentioning Paddy O'Connell. Paddy O'Connell was born within a stone's throw of Croke Park, our famous stadium here in Ireland, for the GAA. And Patrick O'Connell went on to become the manager of Barcelona Football Club at the end of the Spanish Civil War. So it's an amazing connection. And he actually managed the club through a very difficult period of history, a great example of sport and civic engagement. And I'd like to think this is the first time that this connection has been mentioned on a webinar, but that's me just being slightly big-headed. In terms of Yolanda, Yolanda has been at the forefront of community development within the Barcelona club and really has enabled the message that Barcelona is about more than football. And I've been particularly impressed by what the club has been doing since the pandemic came upon us. So maybe, Yolanda, if it's okay to start with, you might share a little bit with us about the initiatives and the things that you've been doing at Barcelona Club in the light of COVID-19.
Sure. Well, first, Pat, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you all what we have been doing since the beginning of the pandemic. So, as you may all know, but in case some of you don't know us as well, Barça Foundation was created in 1994, and since then we receive all the support and the determination of the club to use football as a tool for a better and more inclusive society. And we do it very briefly by using sport and focus on children and youth more at risk or more at vulnerable situation. So last year we end up with more than 1.5 million beneficiaries in 60 countries around the world. And we work continuously in 57 municipalities in Catalonia with our old programs and methodologies. And I think that this pandemic has probably been one of the worst situations Catalonia has experienced since the Civil War, I would say, because it's been really unexpected and everything, it's been new for all the system. So the club immediately because we had to stop all sport activities, put at the service of the health system in Catalonia, the stadium, the facilities, and began launching campaigns to promote awareness on COVID and its effects. And at the same time, our foundation began working and being the channel of the social commitment response of the club to the crisis. And what we undertook very quickly was an adaptation of our programs and methodologies to virtual online platforms, so we won't drop off our kids. And especially at this moment of lockdown, where all relationships with fellows and with our trainers and educators could be at risk. So we immediately adapted it, all our sponsor stakeholders. So we, in a term of 10 days, we started our programs on a virtual mode. And I have to say that the result has been really amazing, and the engagement of the kids, impressive. And on the other side, as I told you, the Camp Nou, the stadium facilities have been led to research groups, especially to test COVID test within several researches led by Catalan scientists. Another of our actions, because we were in lack of health protection material for health workers and social workers, we immediately used our contacts to import those materials from China and do donations to our hospitals and different elderly homes, or for homes for children without tutors or parents. So we distributed all this health protection material, and we still go on doing it because there's still a lot of need in Spain. Another of the initiatives we undertook, and we are very proud of it, it's because we have a program to prevent bullying by using sport, and we realized that the lockdown produced much more connectivity of children. So cyberbullying was a very high risk, and we undertook a campaign. You can check on our website to give tips to parents and children themselves to prevent cyberbullying in this context of massive use of social networks. And probably one of the most outstanding initiatives has been the initiative of the club to seed the title rights incomes of Camp Nou for the first year to the foundation to invest in research internationally and locally. And I think that's been really outstanding. And just to end up, we have another program on children health welfare, and it's we facilitate meet and greets with players of all our sport sections, not only first team of football. And we didn't want to drop off these children at hospital or at home with very severe illnesses. So we are doing now a series of conversations with players and with some of these children, either at home or at hospital. And that's very stimulating for them, for the families, for the health workers, for the players, and for the foundation staff as well. So very briefly, this is the scope of the initiatives we undertook since the beginning of the epidemics, mid-March.
Thanks, Yolanda. That's really amazing. And, in terms of just practical support, in terms of getting materials to people who need that, it's very basic. What the club is doing is outstanding. Can I ask you, though, in terms of the mission of Barcelona, because it is, as you quite rightly pointed out, is more than football, and I mean, there's other sports, of course, as well, including basketball and so forth, and its position in Catalonia, as well as globally. Is it a case, do you think, that when we get back to whatever normal is going to be like, that it will be very difficult for Barcelona Club, or will it change its mission? Will its work internationally suffer?
Of course, we'll be affected, but I don't think we'll be affected at this point that it will change our focus, our objectives nationally, internationally. We'll have for sure a reduction of budget, and we'll have to readapt. And in fact, we're doing it from the very beginning. But I don't think it will affect on this side.
Yeah. And I have one comment in and a question. And just to say, please do send your questions in. We're on Facebook, and we'll try and get as many of your questions in as possible. So one question from Edward, listening in Leicestershire, or watching in Leicestershire. Edward wants to know, to what extent are the players genuinely involved in the foundation and involved in the, for want of a better term, he says, the charity work that the Barca Club do. Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, many of our players have their own foundation, and we generally collaborate with them in these terms, foundation. But also they are very proactive within our programs, and they are leading. They are the face and the stimulation to, for example, for bullying. Our ambassador is Sergi Roberto. And also former players keep on engaged with what we do. But I think one of the most generous response to the crisis in terms of Barca family, Barca staff, has been they have donated part of their salary. They could complement our salary during this crisis. And they have been complementing to get 100% salary to the workers. So it's been a very, very nice gesture from them. But in terms of programs and yeah, they are very proactive. Because our programs also tackle children, I think they are even more engaged to our programs.
Indeed, Yolanda, and I witnessed that fantastic work by the players, and you'll enjoy this comment, and I'm going to move on to our next speaker. But before I do, we had a message in from Paul Tanyan, who recalls that, who Paul is now 18 and recalls 8 years ago when, or more actually 10 years ago, I think, he had a medical condition, a serious medical condition, and he went from Galway, and you very kindly arranged for him to be a mascot in the new camp and to meet the players, and gave him what he says was a transformative day in his life. So he's delighted to have the opportunity via Galway, via webinar, to thank you again all those years later. The work you do. I'm going to move now to our second speaker. Thanks, Yolanda. We probably may come back to you later, hopefully. Our second speaker is a great friend and colleague, Colin Regan. Colin is GAA Community and Health Manager with the GAA based in the headquarters in Croke Park. A formidable Leitrim footballer, as I recall, as well, in not too distant past, and still looking well on it. Colin has been absolutely instrumental in the community response by the GAA to COVID-19, including a massive turnout of volunteerism at club level. So maybe, Colin, you might talk a little bit about the Healthy Clubs initiative, but just generally about what has been happening in the GAA in the light of COVID-19.
Thanks very much, Pat, and hello to everybody tuning in. Yeah, the strength of the Gaelic Athletic Association, the GAA, is the fact that we are a community-based sporting organisation powered by volunteers. And when the emergency hit, that army of volunteers, we have approximately 650,000 members across 1,600 clubs in Ireland, 400 international clubs as well. And there's always a gap, I suppose, between an emergency hitting and the official structures of the state being able to respond to that. The joy of having a GAA club in every community meant that they were able to mobilise their volunteers almost immediately. And within a couple of days of the lockdown being announced in Ireland, we had examples of GAA clubs immediately identifying who in their communities were forced to isolate and cocoon, and then setting up project teams and response teams to ensure that they were being connected with, that they were receiving all the necessary goods, groceries, medications that they required. And this built day on day, week on week, to such an extent that we carried out a survey just about 2 weeks ago to try to assess the scale of it with our membership. And over 80% of GA clubs, of the 1,600 clubs, are involved in a COVID-19 response of some nature. And that included 20,000 volunteers supporting 35,000 people across Ireland who were considered vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. You touched on the Healthy Club project there. It currently involves 300 of our clubs and is an official partnership with Healthy Ireland, the Department of Health, the HSE, the National Office for Suicide Prevention, and the Public Health Agency in the 6 counties. Of course, we cross 2 jurisdictions here. And they were amongst the first clubs to respond and would have benefited from the fact that volunteer officers in those clubs had made themselves available for what is essentially, we call it Healthy Club officer training, but it is essentially health promotion through sport training. And as part of that project, many of the clubs would have already been reaching out to older members of the community, to providing services, to ensuring their games were available to persons of special needs, to the GA for All program, etc., etc. So really, to touch on what Mark was talking about a little earlier, they have been manifesting the values of the association and our new manifesto, Where We All Belong, and bringing that to life.
Thanks, Colin. I mean, that is an incredible, absolutely incredible response. I mean, my colleague here in Nenyawaigoli, Eamon O'Shea, who, when he's not in Nenyawaigoli, is managing or very heavily involved with Tipperary hurling, as you know. I mean, he has often said to me that if you were to put a cost on the volunteer activity in the GAA, in terms of a social good to the state, it's phenomenal. One question I'm wondering about, though, is with the lockdown, has the lockdown, and I'm kind of thinking of when that was, probably last week in March, there probably was there a reduction in volunteerism because people couldn't, we had not just social distancing, but we could only walk, within less than 5 kilometers or whatever it was. And there was kind of this feeling that we all, for good reason, had to stay apart in order to support each other. Did that impact negatively on the volunteerism, or did it make any difference?
On the contrary, Pat, I think we had a surplus of volunteers. I know that, to give you just one example off the top of my head, the Blessington Club in Wicklow put a shout out for members to support their community call, and they had over 100 people make themselves available for deliveries and the likes. I think the GA has always benefited from their community. The local clubs have. It's very much a two-way relationship. They also give a manifestation to the community in terms of their identity, in terms of their social cohesion, and they are completely dependent on the support of their community to fund financially through donations and the likes, club activities, but also through volunteerism. It's community members that runs the club. So when the community in turn needed the club to step up, they weren't found wanting. And despite juggling the stresses that the emergency brought, and maybe we all have been living our own COVID-19 experiences in terms of childcare, etc. There was no community in the country found wanting, and the GAA doesn't have exclusive rights on that. Other community organisations, fantastic charities like Alone, have been working shoulder to shoulder with the GA volunteers, and I think that would be one of the real positives to come out of this here experience. I think that there would be much closer links developed between the sporting organisations such as the GA, which has always considered itself a community association as much as a sporting association, and some of the other statutory structures at local authority level or other charitable or NGOs working at community level as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Colin. Well, I'm going to move now. Thanks. We'll probably come back to some of this a little later, hopefully, if we have time. But I'd like to move now to give you what for me is a personal big honour to introduce Jack McCaffrey. If you're a Dublin football supporter, as I am, even though I'm living in Galway, he needs very little introduction, but he is also well known indeed nationally. Jack played, his club is Clontarf, and he also played with UCD and Dublin, of course, and continues with a fantastic career. I'm going to ask you a little bit about your professional life in a moment, but maybe, Jack, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your own feelings about playing GAA in terms of your own development and your values and sense of belonging, either in club or university or county, or just generally what you feel about kind of the whole issue around sense of community and playing Gaelic football.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Pat. So I suppose, as you mentioned, I started playing with my club, Clontarf, back when I was probably 3 years old, and I've been pretty much immersed in sport and in GAA in particular ever since. So for me, it's quite difficult actually to identify any kind of personality traits or value set that I have that hasn't probably come from sport. I suppose initially it would have been in terms of introducing me to my peers, teaching me how to win well, more often how to lose well, and then, getting a healthy competitive edge. And once I moved on to, I suppose, a higher or a different level, and was involved with UCD in Dublin, you start meeting people from outside your bubble that you might have grown up in, and people from very different and diverse social backgrounds. Ireland is, they're like, people can live a stone's throw away from each other and be living entirely different lives. So that was something that I was always very keenly aware of, and it played a big part in kind of forming me as a person, I suppose, and has helped me a massive amount. I just wanted to quickly, if I can, hop on the back of one of Colin's points about the kind of volunteerism. There's this kind of Irish concept historically of a mehel, where when one member of the community needs something done, if they're bringing in their crops traditionally or something in a village setting, everybody would just row in behind them, lend a hand, and make sure that it gets done. And then when you needed something done, you knew that your neighbours would come and help you. And the kind of spirit of that is something I've seen a huge amount of just in the last couple of months, in Clontarf personally for me, but as Colin mentioned, in pretty much every community around the country. So it's been really remarkable.
Great. We've a very interesting question in from Phelan, who's a young Dublin supporter who's celebrating his birthday, who wants to know, Jack, if do you think after COVID-19, when we get back to fully playing, sport the way we want to with packed stadiums and very competitive, he's wondering, will when people's temperature, I think is the word he uses here, gets too high on the terraces and they need to calm down, will they show more empathy and understanding? I suppose the question is about sport is competitive, which is lovely, and we enjoy it. But in the end of the day, it's not life or death. What's your view on that issue?
Happy birthday, Phelan, first of all. That's a very interesting question. And I've only been talking about that recently with my family and a few of my friends about the kind of positive things that we can take from these really, really strange times. For example, I don't think I'll ever go out for a walk again where I don't make eye contact with everyone I meet, say hello, how are you getting on? Even if you don't stop for a chat, you just keep moving. And I think this pandemic and the lockdown that we're in has given us a real opportunity to reassess what we think is important. And I certainly hope that if Phelan finds himself in Croke Park one day and there's a Mayo or a Kerry fan getting very upset that maybe Phelan will commiserate with them, say hard luck, and go off and celebrate a Dublin win, hopefully.
Great. So the other thing I was going to ask you about is about your work as a doctor, and I recall actually bumping into you at a Sigerson's match in Galway when UCD were playing Galway and playing NUI Galway. And Seamus O'Grady, my colleague, said it was the first time he ever saw somebody who was involved in a NUI Galway club still cheering for UCD at the same time, but I had total torn loyalty. But you were actually, that was just before you went to Africa. You know, that you took a year out. What was that? What was your experience in Africa like for you?
So I would have spent a summer in Africa back in 2016, and I suppose only about 4 weeks of that was spent in a hospital. At that point, I was very early in my medical training. I was pretty useless around the place, to be honest. I was there more probably to get experience for myself than to offer anything of value. But it was really eye-opening. It certainly gave me a desire to go back at a point in my career when I hopefully can contribute more. And I suppose at the moment as well, when you look around at so many countries that we would have probably assumed were better off, for want of a better word, with their health systems, and seeing how we're all struggling, it's something that I'm quite keenly aware of, that a lot of these places haven't got the infrastructures that we have, haven't got the resources that we have, and are probably looking at a really tough battle. So I think it's kind of incumbent upon us to help them out as much as we can.
Great, thanks very much, Jack. I'm delighted now to move to our next speaker, Caroline O'Hanlon, who is not just a fantastic Armagh GAA football player over many years and an international netball player, but is also, again, a doctor on the front line and has spoken very rightly about our need for good behaviour around COVID-19. Caroline, if I could ask you just again about your personal development, and obviously I'm conscious, you know, that you growing up in Northern Ireland and the issues there are around sport, but I'm particularly interested in the influence sport has had on your life.
Thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this. It's been really interesting to hear everyone so far. I suppose in a similar way to Jack, I've been immersed in sport since as far as I can remember. I started playing both Gaelic and netball when I was about 8 or 9, you know, from primary school right through. So for me, it's only really on reflection that you sort of realize what benefits you've had from being involved in sport. Obviously at that age you're only really involved because I enjoyed it and love competing, and you know, the love just getting out and playing. But I suppose on reflection you see the value of working as part of a team. It's something that you take for granted maybe whenever you've always been in a team. So, and it's only when you go out into the world of work you realize the skills that you've maybe picked up from that age in terms of communicating, you know, understanding people and their different roles within the team and valuing that. So that's been really important for me. I suppose getting the satisfaction of setting goals, working hard and achieving something because you've worked hard, just that commitment and drive that you get from sport has been really important. And as Jack touched on, I suppose resilience, it's a buzzword at the moment or all the time about sport, but it is really important to learn to deal with the losses or the disappointments that come along with sport. I do think that has a massive factor in shaping you outside of sport. I suppose for me, I just like to make a point about the GAA, as I've touched on it obviously a lot, about how important it has been, particularly at the moment. And I've been amazed at how quickly the GAA community have mobilised in response to COVID-19, and particularly living in the north, where obviously we're sort of listening to different advice, and for a point in time at the very start of the pandemic, it was a difficult place to be because we were listening to advice from Leo Varadkar from the south, where you were obviously moving very fast and, you know, commencing the lockdown early on, and then you had the advice from the British government where they didn't impose those restrictions as early. And for us here, it was a very uncertain time, and I suppose a worrying time. So for me, the GAA and the LGFA, their response and the leadership that they showed at that time was brilliant. They acted really quickly. They were very clear about what they wanted to do in terms of closing the pitches, setting down advice for clubs and players in terms of training and stopping all that, and getting messages out to players. Obviously, they have a massive reach, and that really, I suppose, I suppose made a statement, I suppose, about how important it was to follow these rules whenever they just made took that strong stance so early on. But it's been, as I say, a difficult time. But watching how the community and how the GAA clubs have responded has been, a really positive experience of the COVID-19. And as you say, identifying those people in our communities who are in need or require support, that's been a lovely thing to see. And I've been very proud of my association with the GAA and how they have responded to that.
Thanks, and a very good question in here, Caroline, from Margaret in Belfast, who seems to know you, but she's wondering about, do you think the divisions, from what she uses the word divisions anyway, between sport and religion and the kind of traditional way that soccer was seen in one community and the GAA in another and so forth, she's wondering, do you think could COVID help heal some of that division?
That's a very tricky question. I suppose, yeah, I think the whole community. I don't think that has been great in their response, and I think that it's not just the GAA, and they haven't just been targeting the members of the GAA. They have been trying to help the whole community, and I think there has been a united response in terms of how resources are used. Different contact numbers and contacts that are available in order to help the vulnerable in the community. So I would like to think that has happened in the north quite often, and it has happened through during the COVID through the pandemic, where it has been, politics has been brought into it in terms of which advice we're listening to. I think certainly in the as things have gone on, our government has given a more united response, and that has settled people, because politics had no place in it. I mean, it was always about us as a people and protecting each other across the board. Politics wasn't going to skip one religion or the other. So it should never have been an issue, and we should always have had a united response from the start. And I do think as it has gone on, our government has certainly followed that as opposed to at the start.
No, that's a great answer indeed. I absolutely agree with you. And Mark and I are working very closely with our great colleague and fellow UNESCO chair, Professor Alan Smith in UU, and he will be of the same view. So thank you very much indeed, Caroline. We're going to move now slightly across the ocean, and I'm delighted to welcome Colin McDonough from the University of Delaware in the USA, who is doing her doctoral study on the relationship between sport and empathy. So highly relevant to this webinar, and I'm delighted to be on her graduate committee working with her. So Colin, you might share a little bit about your learning so far. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. First off, I just have to say, Dr. Billman making me follow two professional athletes and doctors. I'll definitely have to thank you for that later. But yeah, I'm so excited to be on the call, learning from the other speakers as well, and really inspirational work. So as you said, I'm particularly interested in empathy in sport because of my dissertation work, but also because I coach at a juvenile correctional facility for adjudicated young men. So their ages 13 to 18. And this opportunity for them to learn empathy through sport which kind of draws them in and they enjoy, it can have really powerful implications for the ways in which they interact with one another, with their families and communities when they return home. And that can be through either static empathy, so the ability to kind of identify with someone else, that could be a victim or a rival gang member, or active empathy, so doing something about it. And that could be choosing, not to participate in a crime or a violent act because you think of the implications and the feelings of that person or the people that care about you. And I can say that coaching at the facility, I have witnessed on almost a daily basis young men displaying empathy to one another on the sport field. But these lessons are not just for our young men at the facility. They are critical for all of us. Sport is not often viewed as a context really ripe for possibility to kind of teach or express empathy. Yet from the research and from the real world examples that my colleagues have already shared and that I'll share, sport, it can have a place of great possibility for learning and expressing empathy, especially important during this time when our sport leagues and programs have either been closed or significantly modified. So that's kind of the lens that I take, but I thought it might be helpful to kind of ground the conversation in some of the larger literature in the field. So kind of what do we really know about the relationship between empathy and sport? So Dr. Dolan, I know you don't want to get too academic here. If I could just dive into the science for just a second, I think it's very interesting. So from the literature, Sivdalis and Rob discuss how empathy may be particularly evident in situations that involve the trained human body in motion. So if we think about sport, we're learning movement patterns. So say a layup in basketball, and then we're coordinating those movement patterns with each other. So for instance, kind of running a play. If I'm a point guard, I might set a screen for the other guard, and I need to make sure that I kind of time that well with them. And then interactions with others to accomplish an objective. And that could be scoring a basket off that play. So these skills require people to predict others' intentions and actions and then adapt their own. For my athletes and coaches on the call, we call this field sense. And we know that some people have great field sense and some people have a little room to improve. But what's underscored here is it's an empathetic process, which is associated with the capacity to understand other individuals' cognitive states. So simply, it means that engaging in physical activity could have implications for empathy. But there's also intentional programmatic features that can help empathy to blossom. So in youth sport programs, if young people even perceived the atmosphere to be caring, they had higher levels of empathetic self-efficacy or their own ability to be empathetic. And then participating in sport-based community service programs were shown to enhance levels of empathetic concern and social responsibility among adolescent participants. Really, I think fascinating research. So if I can kind of move from that larger research body to real-world examples, here at our University of Delaware, our varsity men's lacrosse team has a partnership with the same juvenile facility that I coach at, the Ferris School for Boys. And I wouldn't frame it so much as community service, because I think that displays kind of a one-way action. But I'd say, it's engagement. Each group is kind of brought together by sport with this opportunity to learn about each other, their various backgrounds and experiences, which I think oftentimes helps them to find, a common interest and maybe bridge some of those perceived gaps. This provides, again, a conducive environment for learning and expressing empathy. So if we know that sport and empathy have a potentially kind of entangled relationship, what can we learn from this time during COVID and use these lessons to further kind of solidify or capitalize on the relationship? With the influence of the pandemic, we have witnessed in sport, but in other fields, kind of this virtual movement. So since people can't meet in person to play and work out, they're going online, which has revealed a tremendous opportunity to address a gap in access to sport. Not everyone has access to sport. There's issues related to geographic location, related to income, even institutional barriers. Think about, the young men at the juvenile facility or other institutions. So some examples, of virtual sport, we have yoga, races, workout classes. I think, honestly, people are getting more creative by the minute. And it's not to say we want to replace traditional sport, because I know there's probably people all across Ireland who absolutely want Caroline and Jack back on the field as soon as possible. But I think it's an opportunity for us to think about the role of virtual sport in these recovery situations and how we can be mindful in how we design those programs. So With the virtual movement, we now have an opportunity to support the engagement of people from all over the world, from different backgrounds, cultures. And I think we can only imagine when given the opportunity to engage with one another in a positive context like sport, as long as we construct it in a positive context, the chance for empathetic learning and expression could have implications far beyond what we could ever imagine right now. So those were just kind of some of my thoughts. And again, thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed listening the past couple of weeks and kind of joining in with all the followers as like a global network. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Kaylin. That was really, really, really interesting and great insight into the science behind empathy and sport. We have some great questions coming in, which I really want to get to. But before I do that, and I'm absolutely thrilled that we have Ria Ramnarayan here with us. Ria is a former world boxing champion and International Boxing Association coach of very high renown. And she's developed this incredible program called Boxing Beyond the Ring, which really is fascinating. So maybe, Ria, you're very welcome. And maybe you might just to start with share a little bit with us about your program.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity. Yeah, I'd love to share a lot and a summary, actually, of course, about Boxing Beyond the Ring, because understanding the background for the program would show, just how much sport really is an empathy tool. So Boxing Beyond the Ring was a result of an Olympic Solidarity course, which is an international coaching enrichment certification program. It began as a Sport Plus initiative, so it was basically to increase the number of women and girls participating in boxing here in Trinidad and Tobago. But during my research, I was really reminded about the power of sport, and that is apart from the medals and the championships and the trophies. And boxing more so, because boxing is actually learning self-defense. It increases personal safety awareness, confidence, self-efficacy. And with that in mind, I realized that, hey, the empowerment of women and girls was a much more significant cause. There are so many cases of domestic and gender-based violence, and it's so prominent in society. I thought we could develop this program to address a societal problem, hence the name Boxing Beyond the Ring. So basically a bit about the structure of the program. It was structured to provide a safe and comfortable space to encourage any female to participate. And it was aimed at helping them to develop that personal safety awareness and to empower them with the tools to fight back if the need ever arose. And for those who were victims of any type of violence before, it really encouraged them to reestablish their sense of confidence and their sense of self-worth. So during my apprenticeship at ICCP, I learned, I was given a saying by a retired coach at the US Air Force Academy, and it says, unless real or perceived danger is present, no true courage can be displayed. So in teaching these women and girls how to box, putting them in a fight scenario, it really helped them to learn how to stand firm in the face of fear, danger, and uncertainty. They were engaged, if you want to say, in a fight, so to speak, and they were able to handle that confrontation both on a psychological level and then in a physical sense. Because, of course, we taught them how to punch properly and where it would be most effective. So anyways, the results of the 6 weeks, the pilot cycle was a 6-week program. It showed some remarkable results, actually. And what stood out was the development of self-confidence, the feeling of self-worth, and the network that was built. That in itself was quite fantastic. 90% of the participants began the program very, very shy. They were afraid to put on boxing gloves. They stayed clear of each other. But just within a month, I had to shoot them out of the ring, shoot them away from the boxing bags, let them know, hey, class is over. We need to go home, But that showed that connection. They had developed a unit. There was that critical understanding. And I think that encapsulated that empathy that, it rose in all of us. So I would take it would take too much time to share the actual numbers and percentages of the before and after surveys, but I assure you, it really was astounding. And when you consider the pilot cycle consisted of 11-year-olds to 50-year-olds, executives, housewives, athletes from different sports, and girls, even girls from a juvenile facility, you see that there were very different demographics, but the empathy displayed, that in itself was empowerment. So transferring that to this time during the COVID-19 pandemic, there was no choice but to transfer it, no choice but to continue the program. With months of a lockdown and more weeks and months looming ahead, home is not necessarily the safest place for some women and even kids, and maybe on few occasions, probably men. If you've been following the news with regards to domestic violence, you would see that there have been many articles and stories about the increase in domestic violence throughout this pandemic in many countries. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago is no different. So I began online training sessions during the second week of lockdown. I worked directly with a few of the women. With some of them, we work in a group. Also, on a side note, my coaching colleagues and I take turns with the boxing gym sessions. And what stood out with that was that a lot of the folks who had not been training at the gym itself, they had now joined the classes. So we see that it was super important to keep the folks as engaged and as connected as much as possible. And not just the training, not just the physical aspect of it, but more so to have conversations, to be able to call on each other, to touch base, because sport is our common ground. We can talk all day long, all year long about sport, not just boxing, but just about any sport. So we had that common ground. The feedback has been fantastic. It's been very encouraging. And for me personally, and I think all those involved, it's very clear that continued support and understanding, that's absolutely critical, especially during these times.
Great, thank you very much, Ria. Thank you very much indeed. That really, and I think it really covered the second question I was going to ask you about COVID-19 and particularly girls and women who are victims of domestic violence, and you covered it so well. So we have a little bit of time left, not too much, only 6 or 7 minutes, but there are numerous questions coming in, and unfortunately we're not going to get to all of them. But I have a question for Yolanda, if that's okay. Yolanda, we have a question from Stefan. And Stefan is wondering, how will the current pandemic affect the La Masia Academy, and how the club is helping younger players deal with mental and financial problems caused by the pandemic? So just wondering about the impact on the academy.
That's difficult for me to answer because I'm not working for the club, but for the foundation. But for sure, as we always did, I mean, the club always took good care of the kids who are training and living there. But we have a whole team of medical staff, psychology staff, education staff, pedagogical. So they will all take good care of whatever need that may arise because of COVID. But again, I'm not the right person to answer that question.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thanks, Yolanda. And we've a question for Colin Regan. So this is coming from Matty Kilroy. Colin, what did you think about the peace saving for the elderly in County Offaly?
Well, as I'm back many times in the bog, I never thought I'd miss a day saving turf. I could feel, I could empathise with the lads who went out. I thought it was a wonderful gesture again for those in the community of the GA got together to save some turf. Those who couldn't get out to save their turf. So it's inventive and creative ways to and to pitch in on behalf of the community, Pat.
Yeah, as was mentioned earlier, another great example of Mehel. A question here for Jack, Jack McCaffrey. Jack, looking to the future, this is a question purely around GAA, and the whole professionalism and amateurism status. And it's very good. It's a comment coming in from Michael in Dublin, and he's saying, given that the GAA is an amateur sport and has a incredible community tradition, do you think the risk of professionalisation, if it was to come in for players, would it damage the sport? What effect would it have if it happened?
Yeah, great question. I think it would destroy Gaelic entirely, to be honest. I certainly would be hugely opposed to it. The whole beauty of the GAA is that it's rooted in Irish history, and it's rooted in the Irish community, and even the Irish community abroad is where you often see it praised the most. But it's certainly one of the special things that you play with your club, you play with your county. Once you finish with the county, you're back with the club, and there's no kind of barrier or difference between the club player and the county player. So I think it would have an awful effect on the organisation if it was ever to come in.
Mm-hmm. We have a question coming in from the States here, from Iowa. I think it's Des Moines in Iowa. A question for Ria. So Ria, could you talk about the role of sport and empathy in your life?
Well, to begin with, I'm usually identified as the boxer. Very rare out in public, I'm referred to as Ria. People identify me through my sport. And for me, boxing it's so parallel to real life that, as we say, in the ring, it really shows the truth. So all that I've learned, even though I got into boxing when I was like more on the older side, like 19, it really came from my sport. A lot of the empathy that I've learned in terms of understanding people, understanding their presence, understanding how to work with them, understanding when to step back, when to step forward, what to share and what not to share, questions to ask and questions not to ask. It really came through my experience from boxing. And for me, the two is so connected. So it's not one fulfilling role like sport fulfilling a role in empathy, or empathy fulfilling a role in sport. For me, they're both very connected. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I have a question which I'm going to ask Caroline if she's okay with answering. And it's from Dara. Caroline, do you think the lack of sport will have a lasting negative effect on young people?
I hope not. I think, I suppose, reflecting personally on it, not having sport has made me appreciate sport and value it. And I for one have really missed it when it hasn't been there. I've really missed being part of the team, being out every night training with my teammates, having that support around you. Whenever having it taken away through this pandemic has really only reinforced for me the importance of that. Obviously within that we've still had like WhatsApp groups and contact with our teammates in order to provide support, but I think for me it has, as I say, really stressed the importance of that in my day-to-day life and how much I appreciate that, even coming from work and not having that outlet and that bit of crack in the evening, chatting with people, that opportunity to unwind from the day. So I hope that young people in the same way are just with the break getting more eager to get back, and in the same way missing it and hoping that it returns sooner rather than later.
Yeah, that sounds totally reasonable to me. We're coming to the end of the webinar. I just want to make a comment that as Colin would be very aware of, and it's interesting because it goes across all the groups here today, is the whole issue of respect. And respect is a value now that it's been very strongly advocated within the GAA nationally. I'm very aware of that. and at the Barça club in terms of its tradition and its connections with Catalonia and beyond, but also in NUI Galway, where I'm based, and our university president, Professor Kieran Huggerdig, has led out on a new value system on our strategy, and respect is the first one that comes up in that. And I think respect in sport is really what is the seed that leads to empathy, and that, you know, it's the underpinning basis on which we demonstrate active empathy, which Mark and I and other colleagues are very actively researching, not just in sport but across society. Before I go, and first of all, thank you all for viewing this and for joining in. And I wish to thank all our fantastic set of speakers. I won't go through you all individually because it'll take too long, but I love you all the same. What I would like particularly to do, though, is to make a particular word of thanks. Over the last 5 weeks, and as we go forward with this, we've been very lucky that Catherine White and Lorraine Leeson have been signing to our community every week. So a very big thank you to both of you for what you've done. And please tune in next week, and stay safe, stay well, and have a good long weekend. Thank you.